Here's why I said that. To get started.
Yeah, I have
make sure
8
people get
o'clock,
on
so
here.
I'll go ahead and get started since it's 8 o'clock. Good morning, everyone. My name is Amy Dotz. I'm the event manager for the Conway Center. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, HR and Coronavirus. This webinar is presented by Conway member Sharon, president and owner of GoHR. Sharon facilitates our quarterly Human Resources Forum and has provided us with numerous resources over the past few weeks that you can find on our website and on our Facebook page. So before I hand it over to Sharon, I just wanted to review a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions during today's presentation, you can enter them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. We will answer as many as we can at the end of the webinar, and then I'll also send out an email with a link to the recording of the session. Thank you, and Sharon, it's all yours.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So I feel compelled just to say, I'm not an attorney, you guys know this, I'm not a CPA, and I'm not a financial advisor. And that's really important to share with you because as we go through a lot of this information, I'm going to redirect you back to some of those key business partners because they're going to be able to take a different strategic approach maybe than what you may be thinking of or even what we talk about today. So just keep that in mind as we go through our discussion. And let's get started. My goal today is to give you an overview, and I'm sure you've heard a million different things from a lot of different resources. So I want to give you an overview of the most current information that is out there to my knowledge. Keep in mind the guidance on the FFCRA, which we're going to talk about, and the CARES Act, which we're going to touch on, continues to change almost daily. So with that in mind, let's ramp up your stress levels a little bit and then we'll calm them down at the end. Think of this as a spa visit, maybe an exercise session. So let's talk first about the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. You'll often see it referred to as the FFCRA. So in terms of a congressional act, it's actually pretty lean compared to the 880 pages of the CARES Act. It was signed into effect on March 18th, and that effectively gave the Department of Labor about 2 weeks to actually go through and interpret that act. And their interpretation came out really in better favor than maybe what a lot of people thought when the act first came out. So it contains multiple considerations, including nutrition waivers, SNAP, and things like that. But really the reason you're all here, we know this, is for the emergency paid sick leave, which you're going to see abbreviated as the EPSL, and the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act, which you're going to be seeing abbreviated as the EFMLEA. So that's good to know to kind of level set as we go through talking about some of this. So the FFCRA, here's what it's not. It is absolutely not 3 months of paid time off for your employees. And a lot of employees, not good employees, not responsible employees, not employees who have ownership of their jobs and your business, but those employees who are always looking for something to their benefit tend to be thinking it's 3 months of paid time off. And those are the conversations we've been having with a lot of our employers. And employers are honestly afraid it is 3 months of paid time off, but it's not. And we're going to go through that and you're going to see why. And it's certainly not traditional FMLA. If you're an employer on here or you work for an employer on here who has fewer than 50 employees, you don't interact with FMLA in your workplace generally. So you may not know that. For those employers on here who have fewer than 50 employees, deliberately in some cases to avoid FMLA, it's not traditional FMLA. So when we unpack this actual act, you'll start to see how narrowly defined it really is. So here's what it is. It's very narrow. It has two critical components. And it really, if you look at the mandatory posting or notice that you were supposed to be distributing to all of your employees, you'll see that it really has employer protections and guides built directly into the notice to help you walk through it, unpack it, peel back the layers of the onion so you can determine who should be getting the paid sick leave or the expanded FMLA. So let's take a look at it. So it provides paid leave or up to 80 hours, and this is the paid sick leave, the emergency paid sick leave, up to 80 hours for employees. And here's the criteria. They will get 100% of their wages for an employee who is subject to federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order related to COVID-19. So we're there because we have received in the state of Ohio a stay-at-home order signed by Governor DeWine and Dr. Acton. We're there. We are definitely in federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order. Now, that number one causes some panic for some employers. So put a pin in it and we'll come back to that one. It also is 100% of wages for an employee who has been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine related to COVID-19. The key here is underlined, advised by a healthcare provider, not just because they come in and tell you they need to self-quarantine. And then it's 100% of wages for an employee who has experienced COVID-19 symptoms and is seeking medical diagnosis. So if you have the mandatory notice in front of you right now, I really want you to just highlight these things that I have underlined, because that's going to help you as you are walking through, again, with an employee, trying to determine if they are eligible. So these are key things to look at. It provides partial paid leave for up to 80 hours for 3 other situations. And we're going to take a look at that. 2/3 of the wages for an employee caring for an individual subject to an order, and it says described in 1 or 2 above. So let's go back here and you can see what 1 and 2 are. Okay, so we know we have the quarantine or isolation order, and again we know we have to look at somebody who's been advised by a healthcare provider. Okay, we're going to get to number 5 that's on the notice, so just hold off on that one. It's the big child care brouhaha. And then number 6 is 2/3 of wages for an employee experiencing any other substantially similar condition specified by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. This one's a little challenging, and I will admit this. When you go out and you try to find what is defined as substantially similar conditions, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services was supposed to define it. If they didn't, the DOL was supposed to define it, and it's still kind of vague. So what most people are saying is it's probably something that is related or caused by COVID-19. This is where you're going to have to take a medical professional's guidance on this. So that gives you an overview of how to apply the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act. And when you understand that narrowness of it, it starts to feel less like a 2-week paid vacation and more like true assistance for people who need it, and your ability to apply it with some comfort that it's not going to be a free-for-all. Okay, let's continue, and then we'll come back to some additional considerations. All right, so the 2/3, if employees are caring for a child whose school or place of care is closed or child care provider is unavailable due to COVID-19 related reasons, they are eligible for 12 weeks of a combination of EPSL, EFMLEA at 2/3 their pay. We know the schools are closed. We know child care is closed. So this is one that definitely comes into play. And again, it is in your notice, and it very clearly says up to 12 weeks of paid sick leave and expanded family medical leave at 2/3 for that issue only. The employer may make the first 2 weeks of this unpaid, the first 2 weeks of the 10 weeks. The employee may elect to use the paid sick leave, or the employee may elect to use other accrued paid leave. You can't define it and demand it and direct it. The employee gets to choose that. And then, like the other 5 options, this also has a daily and aggregate cap. So your employees need to understand it's 2/3 of their regular pay, not, again, their full pay, and it's up to a cap that you get to take the credit on, and it's at an aggregate level. So keep that in mind too. And when your employees understand it's not a free-for-all, they may very well rethink what they're asking. Because here are some other key points to remember. If you have work for the employee to do, or if the employee can telework, you don't need to pay them these leaves. And that's why the whole telework thing really needs to be thought through carefully. Can your employees telework? And they don't have to do it during their regular 8 to 5 hours, 8 to 5 o'clock time frame. You can work with them to say that they can do a few hours in the morning, a few hours in the afternoon, and a few hours in the evening, whatever it may be. The telework thing is very concerning for some employers who haven't done it before. It's hard to give up that control. It's hard to give up that oversight. You can put telework agreements in place. And if you want to follow up with me after this session, I'm happy to share a couple of different examples with you. Again, take them to your attorney and have your attorney look at them. But you can put a telework agreement in place for your employees. You do have some rights and guidance here with telework. But also, if you have work for your employees to do, if you're an essential employer and you have work for your employees to do, they can't claim these leaves, and you are not beholden to them unless the employee is legitimately sick, of course. And then what you do is they come in, they do the work, and you observe the requirements for sanitation and social distancing and all of those various things. You put in the safety protocols that you need to put in place for your employees. A lot of employees are coming in and saying, I don't want to come to work because I may get the virus. And the dialogue that you need to have to them, again, from a very kind of objective perspective is, where do you go? Do you go straight home every day? Is every member in your household home every day? If you are the only person who's going out and the only person coming to work and the only person that could be potentially exposed outside of your home, different conversation. But if anybody in your house is going in or out of the house for any reason and potentially could be exposed, it's not just at work where that exposure can happen. So you have to have kind of an objective dialogue with people. And once they start realizing and calming down, it changes the course of the dialogue and the tone and the tenor of the dialogue, and it makes all the difference. Okay, so also remember there are weekly and aggregate caps or daily and aggregate caps on each type of leave. Employees are immediately eligible for the paid sick leave. So if they started yesterday, they'll be eligible today. To get the expanded FMLA, they have to have been employed for at least 30 days. So again, that helps you with some controls. Part-time employees' wages are based on their average earnings for a prior 2-week period. So they don't get full-time 80 hours, even though they were part-time people. The emergency paid sick leave must be taken in full-day increments. The expanded FMLA can be taken intermittently as long as you and the employee agree to the intermittent terms. So that right there should trigger that you write things down. Documentation will be your friend throughout this entire thing, and we're going to talk about that as well. So, for example, with the expanded FMLA, your employee can work for a couple of hours, but then let's say they have to take 3 or 4 hours to do homeschooling, and then they have to come back and work. That is the intermittent discussion that you can have. Then if you are an employer with over 50 employees and you have to be compliant with FMLA, traditional FMLA, which is a lot of times what you're going to be hearing that referred to as now, and expanded FMLA, although apparently I call it FLEA, we'll get that corrected, can be taken concurrently. And the other thing to know is if you have had an employee already take traditional FMLA within the 12-month period that you have defined for your FMLA cycle. So let's say your FMLA cycle is January 1 through December 31st, and you had an employee who was already out for 2 weeks on traditional FMLA for surgery and recovery, they will only have 10 weeks left of the expanded FMLA. So again, you have guidance and protection built into the interpretation by the DOL of these emergency leaves. All right, a couple of other things to remember. A small business with under 50 employees can ask to be waived from paying for these leaves for childcare, probably not the sick leave, if it will, and this is a direct quote from the language, jeopardize the viability of the small business as an ongoing concern. DOL guidance released as recently as March 28th on this identified 3 very specific criteria of what they say will jeopardize the viability of a business. This is where you want to talk to your attorney and your accountant, because if you can meet those waiver requirements, you need to know what you need to document to be in a defensible position to not have to pay for the leave, the expanded FMLA. So again, 3 criteria, and those criteria are pretty specifically defined of what that means. And it could be a key employee who, if they're not there, your business couldn't operate. If you had to pay it out, your business really couldn't function. So it's 3 very limited criteria. Also remember, if you laid people off, they're not on your payroll, they're not eligible for the leave. If somebody was sick before April 1st, they're not eligible for the leave. Right now, as it stands, this act sundowns on December 31st. Because right now we're all thinking in Ohio, once we get through this hump, which the governor's office is projecting to be mid to late April, we'll go back to business as normal. And if somebody in June gets sick, none of this applies. Nope, it applies through the end of the year. We just have to get through the hump to get back to business as normal. But people will probably continue to get sick and get infected through the year. So we have to be willing to navigate through this by federal law through the end of the year. Again, keep that in mind. Okay, if you pay employees on these leaves, you will be able to apply for tax credit. So here are some important things. You're going to talk to your attorney, you're going to talk to your accountant to find out what you can or can't do, and you should most certainly talk to your accountant or your CFO to strategize what's going to work best for you. You want to track all the hours that you pay through either one of these leaves. And I'm paranoid enough, if any of you have ever been in on any of my sessions, you know, I'm paranoid enough that I like to double and triple track and check everything I do. So even though you may be working with your payroll company, I'd still keep separate tracking. Technology can fail, and quite frankly, as fast as all of this stuff has been rolled out, technology is bound to fail, so keep your manual copies. Contact your payroll company for special processes or codes that they're using to submit any FFCRA-related pay versus your normal payroll. So I can tell you, we have talked to a handful of payroll companies. We use Gusto, and we have several of our clients on Gusto. They have rolled out some really rich guidance and assistance for their clients. If you're on Prime Pay, they've rolled out very specific codes, 3 different codes. If you are with Apex Payroll here in Central Ohio, they've rolled out a process to guide any clients through their payroll system. I have heard Paycor, the last I heard, did nothing special. I heard ADP was working on some things, and I believe Paychex rolled out a special code. So check with your payroll company on what you should be doing to track this through payroll. The payroll credits that you will be able to get, tax credits, will be up for the caps stated in the bill. So you need to know those. Your payroll company will know that. Your accountant will know that. When you file your 2020 business taxes, this is how I understand this is going to work. Your payroll company should provide you with a necessary report that your accountant then can use to claim the appropriate credits on your returns. So that's why you need to have those relationships solid and to work with those people. Again, you want to work with your accountant, your payroll company, and your CPA for guidance on the tax credits and the best course of action for you. All right. The other big thing that's coming out of this is unemployment. Now, most of you have probably gone through this process. Just want to do a quick review. The Ohio Department of Job and Family Services released a mass layoff form and a number, and that number is 200-200-180. And that's the number that your employees should use when they go to file for unemployment. There is a misunderstanding out there that all the layoffs had to happen by March 31st because the leaves went into place April 1st. And that's not correct. You may have been working to keep your business going, and it may be that in April, late April, or even May, you can't keep your business going and you're going to have to lay off all or part of your workforce. So that stuff is still in place. You can get the form, you can hand it to anybody you have to lay off. They'll have the number on the form. If you don't have the form, again, follow up with me after. I will send it to you. All right. Claims will not go against your individual accounts. So some concern here is if I lay off 20 people in my workforce, my unemployment insurance rates are going to skyrocket. It's all being applied to the mutualized fund, the state's mutualized fund, instead of the individual employer. And eventually what that means is we'll all have an increase kind of across the board on our uninsurance or our unemployment insurance costs, but it will be applied across every employer versus it hitting one employer particularly hard versus another employer. So in my company, for example, we're very small. I don't anticipate I'm going to have to do any layoffs, but I'm still going to have to experience the impact to the mutualized fund. Let's be honest, we all pay for everything. All right, employees who lose their job or are quarantined are eligible to apply for unemployment. The 1 week waiting period we know has been waived, but here's what's happening now. Employers are getting the paperwork from all of their employees going and filing for unemployment, and they're getting that paperwork and it's saying that their paperwork was due today, their responses, or it was due yesterday. The reason is the unemployment wait time has been waived, so it's not like you're getting a week to respond. You're getting it at the same time that the employee's getting the notification that they're approved and they'll start receiving payments. Unless there's a particular reason you feel compelled to argue an application, you don't need to do anything. Now, there are some people who are getting caught up in all of this who were legitimately laid off from a position or terminated and went out and tried to apply for unemployment. You still need to look at the forms. You still need to manage it. And for the sake of getting things into official record, if it wasn't a layoff related to COVID that you get paperwork on, I'd still respond. So you have official documentation into the record that that employee was terminated from your place of employment or quit because you were one of the employers who were in the look-back period, whatever that case may be. And then the requirement to seek work is waived. Normally, just as an FYI, unemployment can be up to 26 weeks. A congressional act extended that for 13 more weeks if it's necessary. That is different than the federal $600 we're going to talk about. To be eligible, employees have to have earned at least $269 a week in wages. There is a specific look-back period. Again, I have a chart. If for some reason you're an unemployment nerd or wonk and you want to see that chart, I can send it to you. It's really neither here nor there for the purposes of the coronavirus-related unemployment, but I can send it to you if you'd love to see it. Employees with no dependents can earn a maximum of $480 at the state level per week. And then that amount will increase depending on if they have dependents, and it's up to 3 dependents. How that typically works is they'll look at the average income calculated over the look-back period, and then the employee will get half of that, up to $480. So that's how that award comes to be. Again, I can give you a chart on all of the different income levels and the award that they would get. And then filing deadlines for Ohio have not been extended from the employer perspective for taxes, for filing your taxes, but penalties for late reporting and payments have been waived. I would still, and your payroll companies will still probably submit the filings, but if you can't pay or anything, you need to work with the state of Ohio to get that taken care of. And again, keep close to your payroll companies. All right, from a federal level, through the CARES Act, the federal government has made available another $600 payment of federal pandemic unemployment compensation per week to individuals who are eligible through the state rules to receive state unemployment. It's based on a March 28th executed agreement between federal government and each state. So they had to negotiate by March 28th. All the states had done this negotiation. And then the federal government will release the money to the states to then distribute out to employees. Eligible individuals are receiving benefits through a variety of other employment programs. So not every employee, excuse me, on unemployment is going to get the additional $600. There are very specific programs they have to be participating in to be eligible. The pandemic one is one of them. Payments are retroactive. The $600 payments are retroactive to the eligibility date of when the employee was laid off, or when the state signed the agreement, whichever came later. And then the benefit payments are scheduled to end after the last unemployment payment that hits before July 31st. Okay, so that's the nuts, the bolts, and the big hairy pieces of the FFCRA. Let's hop into the CARES Act, and I'm not going to go into all 880 pages. I'm not a banker. I'm not the SBA. I'm not a financial analyst. I'm not a financial advisor, and I'm not your accountant. So it would be not good for me to talk to you about the loans. You want to talk to everybody about those, but I do want to talk about this because it's keeping your employees employed, and that's the whole goal of the Paycheck Protection Program. Here are the big points of it. Yes.
Can I interrupt you just for a second? We do have a couple questions from the first part. Do you want to hear those before we go on?
Sure. Let's hit it. Let's hit it.
If an employee is on EFMLA and using EPSL to cover the first 80 hours, 10 days, can they use the first 80 hours, 10 days intermittently and half-day increments if the company allows it per EFMLA guideline, or does it have to be full day increments per EPSL guideline?
So if they're using it for the child care, what I'm seeing is the employer and the employee really need to sit down and discuss that and map out a plan. The general guidance is the paid sick leave should be in full day increments, but I think if they're using the paid sick leave for the first 2 weeks of the EFMLA, they're saying, write it out, agree to it, and have a discussion.
Okay, good. A few more. The mass layoff number is the number for any number of layoffs. What if you only lay off a few?
We're going to talk a little bit about the layoff strategy, but if you're laying people off related to or as a cause of COVID-19, you need to give them that form and that number, and the number is on the form. That's what you need to give them, so it goes into the mutualized fund, and They can take advantage also of the federal dollars as well.
Okay. If someone self-quarantines, are they eligible for unemployment and FMLA?
Technically, if they just choose to do it out of their own volition, no. And, you know, you need to think about empathy. But again, the mandatory notice gives you all the guidance on how to walk through it. If I self-quarantine because I'm afraid of catching the virus, that's where, as an employer, you want to have a really objective a conversation with that person. If you have work for that person and you are an essential employer and you need them to come in and do that work, but they're just afraid, if you have all of the criteria in place for sanitizing, cleaning protocols, and safe distance, you can expect them to come in. And no, they don't get that. If you can help them set up a telework situation and they can work so they don't have the virus, they're not sick, no, they don't get that. The quarantining has to be, again, look at the language. It has to be that they're seeking a medical diagnosis or their healthcare provider has quarantined them or recommended. But again, just because they're quarantining does not mean they're sick. So if they can telework, they get their full pay, right? They don't get partial pay.
Right.
So they get their full pay.
Okay. If people got sick before April 1st, just to clarify, they are not eligible for emergency FMLA. And what if they are still sick?
Oh, that's a really good question. If it happened before April 1st, they were done, dusted through it by April 1st, they wouldn't get it. It's not retroactive. If they are sick now and they are people who can work once they're through this, again, I would have a dialogue with the individual if they can talk. If they're really sick, though, they likely can't be working. But if they got sick before April 1st, I think theoretically you could have an argument, but this is where you really want to talk to your attorney to find out your liability. What we're seeing is if companies are acting in good faith and trying to make the best decisions based on the information that they have, and we'll look at this a little bit down the road, there is some guidance that says that the wage and hour division is saying, come to us before you do a private lawsuit. Well, let's work through this. If employers are trying to act in the best interest of everybody involved and they've gone through a lot of discussion and really tried to unpack things, you're going to arrive at the right decision. But if you don't have work for people, hopefully you've laid them off and they can go out and take advantage of the unemployment. If you have work for people or they can telework, that's where you want to try to go through this guidance that's outlined in this mandatory notice and come to the best solution. And for those people who got sick before April 1st, they were probably out of work. You know, you've got to kind of go through that timeline and figure it out. And I can't just answer it on the fly. I'd have to see so many different things. And I might say at the end of the day, we might want to loop your lawyer in for the final call on this.
Okay. If someone says they're sick but have not been diagnosed with COVID-19 and their healthcare provider is not recommending they get tested, are they eligible for EPSL?
I would suggest, and this is even what my doctor suggested, I didn't think I was sick with coronavirus, but I have bronchitis. And I had a bout flare up 2 weeks ago. And my doctor said, I have to treat people who I know are sick, not saying you're not sick, but you need to use telehealth. So you can go to the Minute Clinic, you can go to telehealth. There are multiple places. So if you think you're sick, you need that you need that doctor to say self-quarantine. Then if they do, then the paid sick leave applies.
Okay. With the requirement for documentation for the EFMLA, If the reason is to care for another person, what information will serve as proper documentation?
So the expansion FMLA, we're just going to call it that. Here's what the criteria says. They only get up to 12 weeks of paid sick leave and expanded FMLA paid at 2/3 of their wages for caring for a child whose school or place of care is closed due to COVID-19 related reasons. That's it.
Okay.
The paid sick leave is caring for a family member for up to 2 weeks.
Okay. If you have an employee who was temporarily laid off due to COVID-19 on March 16th, and then the position was eliminated on March 25th, and they did not use the mass layoff unemployment number, will they still qualify for unemployment at the highest dollar amount, including the additional federal amount?
So they were laid off on March 16th. Say that again.
Then the position was eliminated on March 25th, and they did not use the mass layoff unemployment number. Do they still qualify for unemployment at the highest dollar amount, including the additional federal amount?
Most likely they were put into that bucket. And what I would say is, if they were laid off on March 16th, was it related to business coming to a stop because of COVID?
Yes, due to COVID.
Yeah, most likely they were put into that bucket. They can take, if you feel like they don't have that number, if there is a concern, you can certainly give them that form and that number, and they can go back and double check. But most likely they were put into that bucket because that's when everybody was hitting the unemployment rolls.
Okay. All right, one more. Should we be keeping people at home who have any COVID-related symptoms such as cough, sneeze, sore throat? How do we make the determination if it's allergy, smoker's cough, or actually COVID? Is it the employee who decides, or what if people are uncomfortable around them?
I think that's probably the biggest thing that is weighing heavily on employers' minds right now and trying to navigate all of this. And again, I think you have to go through multiple layers of an internal dialogue with your leaders, dialogue with the employees. This is not the time to not talk to people candidly. And so I think you go through the process of, this is all that we're doing to create a safe, clean, and work environment. Internally, if you see people who are coughing and not covering their coughs or whatever, you need to call it out. Hopefully part of your protocol for your essential employees is you do have face masks for them. That's even being advised for even people who are staying at home and running out to the store now, face masks. So hopefully you've got all the protocols in place. You're cleaning your place of work if you're an essential employer at least twice a day. You're doing the social distancing. You have face masks, you have gloves, all of those things in place to reduce that discomfort. Again, I've had to talk to people to say, are you going out to the store to get groceries for your family? Are you running to pick up a carryout order at a restaurant for your family? If you are, you're as much risk of exposure in those situations as if you're going to work where they're cleaning and following safety protocols and sanitation protocols. So let's be as objective as possible to figure out what we can do here. So we have to go through these dialogues. It's uncomfortable, but we have to have these conversations. These are not 3 months of paid time off for everybody, because if the business fails, those employees have nothing to come back to. And it's going to take time for businesses to step back up anyway. We want to keep the businesses as healthy as we're keeping the employees, because when we get through the curve and when the governor starts opening things back up, we have to all build back up. So now's the time to have these dialogues. And if people want to self-select out because they're uncomfortable and they want to stay home and quarantine on their own, let them go to the unemployment option.
Okay. Is taking the temperature mandatory?
Highly advised. And it's weird. Here's the thing. Highly advised right now, and there's a couple ways you can do it. If you can find a temporal scanner, good luck. But if you can find a temporal scanner, you can scan people every day as they walk in the door. I would train your managers to be doing that. I wouldn't just let anybody do it. And I would make sure your managers know that this is, in effect, considered a medical examination, which in any other time would not be acceptable for an employer to do like this. So after this whole thing is over, you have to quit taking the temperatures. Another way that you can do it is that you can have employees take their temperatures every morning they come in, before they come in, and you can have them self-attest that their temperatures did not exceed 100 degrees. So those are a couple of different ways that you can do it. Is it mandatory? I would say you would want to build that into your safety protocols. You want to do everything you can, if you are remaining open as an essential employer, to show that you did everything that you could to create a safe environment.
Okay. All right, last one, and then I'll let you move on. Many employees are being denied unemployment in our organization for the COVID mass layoff. What are we doing wrong?
I don't know.
Okay.
Are they being denied, or are they being told that they don't have a PIN number? There are several issues going on that they are working through and getting through in the system. So number one, they don't want people to call. They want people to do it online. So they overwhelmed the online systems. Then what was happening is people were being told, you already have a PIN number. You need to use your PIN number to log into your account. And these people had never applied for unemployment. So it was a glitch in the system. So the question becomes, are they being truly denied? And if so, if they were laid off based on COVID reasons, give them the form, give them the number, and tell them to go back at it. It's a game of patience and fortitude at this point. And at the bottom of that form, there is a link. Log into that link, and it will take you to all of the unemployment offices throughout the state. If you were me, I'm kind of like a pit bull, and I will tell you, I would be calling every one of those numbers until I got a live person. Just my opinion.
Okay. Can I just ask one more, and then I promise I'll let you move on.
Absolutely.
If you have work for employees, you said that, well, I'm sorry. If you have work for employees, you said you do not have to pay them for EPSL or EFMLEA. I do not have telework and I am under 50 employees. Is there a form I need to fill out, or do I get it waived because I have work for them?
Okay, I'm going to answer the question based on how I understand it. If the employer is an essential employer, and they have work for an employee, and the employee does not meet one of the qualifying conditions as outlined, and remember, we have 6 that we're working with. If they do not meet one of the qualifying conditions as outlined, then you do not have to pay them. If you are not an essential employer and you can't arrange telework, then you would have to look at if you have to pay them. And most likely, if you haven't laid them off, you're going to have to. So that's kind of the dialogue you have to go through. Are you an essential employer? Do you have work? Can you arrange telework? And one of the things that's going to come out of all of this is all of these employers who said before that they couldn't allow telework at any level may have just proven that they can. So when you start bringing people back on, you better be prepared to have those dialogues as well. So for the person who asked the question who said we can't telework, I'm going to ask you to think about it. And here's why. One of our clients is effectively a wholesaler and a reseller. The bulk of their employees either work on a retail sales floor or they work in a warehouse getting orders out to their clients. That part was easy, okay? They had to get stuff out. They had a distribution chain. they could work through that from an essential employer perspective. They could put stuff through. But what do they do with the people who handle the customers that walk in the front door? So far, they have actually managed to figure out telework for these people. And how they started the conversation, the owner of the business sat down with his leadership team and said, I want to keep people employed for as long as possible. How do we do it? And he went back to his team. He didn't make these decisions alone. He went back to his leadership team, and they came up with some really fast and creative ways to do things. So what's happening is the retail people that worked on the sales floor are picking up additional jobs that they didn't otherwise do to support the people who are still doing the warehousing and distribution, started picking up a higher level of communication and outreach to employees or to clients. They put in some training that they've been putting off on doing for these people. And now they're training these people. And he's applying for things like the Paycheck Protection Program. And he's applying for everything he can to keep his employees employed, but he has them maybe doing things that aren't their normal jobs. Training and upskilling is a great thing to be doing during this time. So I hope that answered your question. If it did not, email me separately because I may not know the full context of it.
Okay. Thanks, Sharon.
All right. Let's look at the Paycheck Protection Program. And again, these are the big hairy bullet points. It is a forgivable loan calculated as an average of 2.5 times your monthly payroll period, your monthly payroll based on specific time frames, and you can get up to $10 million. There are two different time frames that you can use, the previous 12 months or all of 2019. Your bank will tell you what to look at. The SBA will tell you what documentation they want. Compensation, so here's what's included in the calculation. Compensation, various types of leaves, so if somebody was out on FMLA or sick leave or something like that, severance pays, group health benefit payments, employee retirement program payments, and state and local taxes related to payroll are included in the calculation. Any compensation over $100,000 per employee is excluded in the calculation. You can use the Paycheck Protection Program to cover EPSL if you get it in time, but you cannot also claim the tax credit for EPSL if you use the Paycheck Protection Program. This is where you need to work with your accountant. This is where you need to work with your CPA to figure out the best strategy. It's used to cover payroll for 8 weeks, and it's fully forgivable, and there's a little asterisk with this. It's fully forgivable by keeping employees, both headcount and salary, in place or through rehiring them by June 30th. 75% of the funds must be used on payroll for that full forgiveness. If for some reason, though, you get the Paycheck Protection Program loan and you don't use 75% of the funds on payroll, it's a 1% interest loan. It may be all the difference in keeping most of your employees employed and your office rent paid so you can open back up when we're through all of this. Talk to your accountant, talk to your CPA. All right, you can apply for the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, also referred to as the EIDL loan, but you can't double dip on any of the tax credits. You cannot apply for the Paycheck Protection Program and the Employee Retention Credit opportunity. I am not an EIDL expert. I'm not an Employee Retention Credit expert. I'm not even a Paycheck Protection Program expert. I'm just giving you the high points of these. Again, work with your banker, your accountant, and your CPA, your CFO to determine the best strategy for your business. I went through the Paycheck Protection Program application process. The day that it was signed into law, I contacted my bank. They put me on a waiting list. Last Friday, I got emails throughout the day. We're going live in 30 minutes. We're going live in an hour. We're going live in 2 hours. And it kept changing because the SBA kept changing things on the banks. And keep in mind, your banks had 1 week to get their application process and their websites up and running. So even what was on last week may have changed. You want to keep an eye on things. You have to apply through your bank. Some payroll companies are doing applications. and there are other approved lenders. You have to apply through one of them. The funds are available, first come, first serve, although I read yesterday the federal government was looking at releasing additional funds. So don't lose hope if you didn't make the first round. The application process through the bank was about 15, 20 minutes. They asked for a lot of information. Your payroll company, like Gusto again, sent all of us reports on here was your average payroll per month and your average head count for the periods in question. They did that for us. Maybe your payroll company is doing that for you. You go through all that with the bank, and they'll tell you then that the SBA will be calling you for documentation and final approval. I did everything last Friday. It's now Wednesday. I haven't received a call from the SBA yet. I would imagine they are overwhelmed and up to their eyeballs, and they're opening round 2 this Friday for self-employed people. So I don't anticipate a call anytime soon. Hoping for it, but I'm not holding my breath. But again, work with those people who know your numbers and know your business to figure out which loan and combinations work best for you. Okay, here's something else that benefits employees, and this is why I'm bringing this up through the CARES Act. It allows hardship distributions of up to $100,000 from retirement accounts. And those hardship distributions that may have been taken out all the way back to January 1st could count. It eliminates the 10% penalty for that hardship distribution. It does not eliminate the taxes on it. 401k and 403s are the 2 types of retirement accounts that you can take the hardship distributions out of. If an employee and it's not considered a loan, so you're not going to be doing all the paycheck repayment, but if they replace the distribution within 3 years, they'll also be able to recover the income taxes that applied to that withdrawal. So advise employees, this is my best advice if they come to you and ask about this, advise them to seek guidance from their financial planner, and whoever your broker is for your 401k or your 403b, loop them in. I promise you they're probably still learning about this as well. You don't want to advise on this any more than I do. So tell your employees, yeah, you have that option. There are things that apply. I'm not up to speed on all of it, so I think you need to talk to your financial planner, and here's the name of our person who represents the plan for us. We will do whatever we can to help make this happen. All right. The other thing I just want to mention on this is you're going to be making a lot of decisions. You're going to be trying to do the best that you can for everybody involved, including the business. So document the rationale you use for every decision. Even if you're talking to your CPA, your accountant, your attorney, document your entire conversation and the why and the how for the decisions that you're making. You want everything to be defensible. When you are making layoffs, document how you arrived at who you laid off. For example, maybe everybody you laid off in round 1 was just the people who were on performance review plans across the board, all employees on performance review plans. Maybe level 2 was this division was laid off because business stopped in that division. You want to make sure that the layoff decisions you're making are defensible and not discriminatory. Document all the payments you made under the leaves and how the monies for the loans were spent. And then work again with those accountants, those attorneys, those financial advisors, those CPAs, somebody like me to determine the best strategy for your business. Because you're not going to be able to call anybody back if you do not have a business to call them back to. You have to protect the business to ultimately protect the employees too. There are lots of plans out there to protect those employees that you have to lay off. And while it feels horrible to do that, you have to let these systems work the way they were intended to work. You have to also protect the business. So you want to do things that are empathetic, but also defensible. So documentation is going to be your friend. From an HR perspective, you hear that from me all the time, and I know y'all hate it, but documentation is your friend. All right, so let's talk a little bit about bringing people back to work. You want to look at the reinstatement requirements or the job restoration requirements that may apply to you as you start to bring people back. So now that we are through potentially all the layoffs and navigating the paid leaves, or maybe you have the layoffs and the paid leaves under your belt and you know exactly what you're doing, you have your strategies down, you understand it all, now you actually have to start thinking about how you're going to bring people back. So do you want to bring people back in the reverse order that you laid them off? Do you have to bring people back? You need to look at all that criteria and understand it. If they're returning from paid sick leave or EFMLA, they're probably still on your payroll, so they have job restoration at some level of a job or an equivalent position. If they were laid off, then you want to use a different rationale that's defensible for bringing people back. Employers with under 24 employees may not have to restore employees who are out on the expanded FMLA. If the job is eliminated during that time, if the employer attempts to restore that person to a different but equivalent position, or if the position is eliminated but the employer makes attempts throughout the following 1 year period to bring the employee back at some level of a position. Again, you want to make defensible decisions, you want to document everything, but most of all, even though I said the Families First CRA Act has guidance directly in the mandatory notification on who you pay and who you don't pay, some of these people have been with you for a long time and they've been really good, loyal employees. Try to have empathetic conversations. Try to keep your heart in it as much as you can. Try to be as objective as you can as you're having these conversations, but also do this all as equitably and fairly as possible to protect yourself. This is hard work, folks, and I'm not in any way, shape, or form trying to downplay how hard this is on all of you. Try to keep calm. Try to keep a level head. This too will pass. A couple final thoughts. Things for both the FFCRA and the CARES Act continue to be updated regularly. Talk to your business advisors and ask them about changes that may impact you. Do your best. The DOL has indicated that employees of employers with fewer than 50 employees may not file a private lawsuit for violating the Families First CRA without first contacting Wage and Hour. And again, work with your partners. So with that, here's my contact information. I can send you forms. You can also go to my website, which is go-hr.biz. We're keeping a lot of things updated there. And I'm going to turn it back over to you, Amy, if there are any other questions at this point.
There are. The EIDL and PPP, can they be applied for together, meaning double dipping?
You can't double dip. Let me hop back to that slide. You can apply for both of them, but you can't get the tax credits or the end result benefits of both of them. You have to choose one or the other. That's why you want to work with your accountant or CPA to figure out the best strategy. You know, apply for both of them maybe, but which one do you claim the tax credits on? How do you use them? That's what you really want to look at. This becomes a game of strategy. If you're as old as me, you remember a game called Stratego. Think of this all as Stratego.
Okay. If you have an underperformer, is it still better to fire for cause than using the euphemism layoff? Just to clarify, we can upgrade a team as long as we keep the employment number, the 90%, the same or greater, correct? You want me to read that again?
That sounds like two different questions.
Okay. If you have an underperformer.
So if you have an underperformer, should you, you know, that's a little bit of a philosophical, ethical question. You can kick the can down the road and just lay them off. Are you laying off all underperformers in the company? Do you only have one underperformer? You know, is laying off that underperformer, is it documented that they're an underperformer? If you lay them off for underperformance and they go apply for unemployment, what's the decision that unemployment's going to make? I believe if this underperformance is well documented and the person just is not getting it, I'm a believer you should do the correct thing and lay them off for the correct reason. You're technically terminating them for poor performance. They will, of course, probably try to go for unemployment, and then you have to figure out how to deal with that from there. If you lay them off due to COVID, again, make sure you have a defensible act. Are all of the poor performers who are on performance plans also being laid off? And then are you just kicking the can down the road? So it's kind of a philosophical and ethical decision to make. I can't advise you on that because I'm not in your head and your heart. I'm not your priest. So I think you have to figure that out on your own. What was part 2 of that question?
Can we upgrade a team as long as we keep the employment numbers the 90% the same or greater?
My understanding is for the Paycheck Protection Program to get the forgiveness, it is about having the same payroll and headcount. So if that's upgrading the team, but you're meeting the payroll and the headcount, you should be fine. The goal is to keep people employed, but to my understanding, they're not looking at the roster of employees by name. They're looking at the payroll and headcount for the forgiveness.
Okay, another question. Is there a specific notice that an employer with less than 25 employees need to provide to its employees?
For what? That they're not going to pay them?
I don't know. I'll let that person do a follow-up one. Let's get to,
Okay.
I'll ask another one here. If you have an employee who went
Amy,
Yep.
let me hop in. The FFCRA notice applies to every employer down to 1 employee, so they have to provide that notice. Is there an additional notice that they are providing if they are trying to get waived? No, they have to keep documentation as to why they're getting waived, and I would advise them to talk to their attorney before they just tell an employee they're not going to pay them. I think that answers the question.
Okay.
If not, we can come back to it.
Okay. That's the notice she was referring to, so thank you. Okay. If you have an employee who went to get COVID-19 testing and was denied the test because the medical profession said that he wasn't showing enough signs of COVID-19 to be tested, can he receive the emergency paid sick leave?
Did the medical professional recommend or advise self-quarantine? That's the question. Look at the notice and look at the 6 qualifying reasons. If he went and the medical professional denied the testing, a lot of times they will advise them to self-quarantine, and sometimes you're not going to get documentation. That's where you have to have a reasonable conversation. Again, if they can show that documentation that they had an appointment. I'm seeing people are getting some level of documentation in a lot of cases, and in some cases they're not. This may be where conversations have to happen. There's going to be some one-offs.
Okay. So a follow-up, what is the reasonable conversation?
Okay, so my employee, Joe, thinks that he has the symptoms. We know some of the symptoms of COVID might be regular flu, which this does not cover regular flu, might be allergies. This does not cover regular allergies. So that's where some of the conversation has to come in. There are very specific, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm losing my language. The coffee hasn't kicked in. There are very specific symptoms. that the CDC is telling you to look for. And so you want to have those conversations. Are you having these symptoms? And then I think you just have to go through that conversation, ask them where they've been. Have they been around other people that have been diagnosed, that are being quarantined, and figure it out from there. Honestly, there are some situations where it's not going to be cut and dried. I think this notice provides a lot of guidance. I think you know your employees, and I think you as the employer have to have conversations. I don't think we can just unilaterally say no to everything, but I think this gives us a lot of guidance to protect us if we do say no. And I think that's what we have to default to. Remember, if people are getting the paid sick leave, apply for a disaster loan, apply for the Paycheck Protection Program to help cover those payments if these are people you still have on your payroll, right? You still had them on your payroll for a reason. That's because you had work for them to do. If you didn't have work for them to do, you should have laid them off. So that's also part of the conversation you have to go through. That's an internal dialogue. So there are so many different things to consider here as you're thinking about what that discussion looks like.
Okay. Well, here we go. If we pay employees through the PPP loan and we have an employee that qualifies for the EFMLA or EPSL, should we pay them with the PPP loan or outright from our bank account?
Give me a second here.
Want me to read that again?
Yeah, repeat it.
If we pay employees through the PPP loan and we have an employee that qualifies for the EFMLA or EPSL, should we pay them with the PPP loan or outright from our account?
I don't know that it matters because the Paycheck Protection Program is giving you money to cover payments, and the leave acts are giving you the opportunity to get the tax credit. You're still paying for everything ultimately out of your bank account because you're going to put the loan from the Paycheck Protection Program into your bank account. If I am missing something obvious, somebody else can certainly pop in.
I'm seeing no hoppers.
Any bankers on here? Bankers, financial advisors, our Kaiser people?
Yeah, I'm not seeing anybody that has anything different than what you're saying, Sharon.
Okay, here's what I would like to do, because I did specifically approach the Kaiser Consulting attendees on here and ask them to be prepared to answer any questions. So I wanted to ask them if there was anything I missed or I misstated that they feel a need at this point to point out or correct for the participants on here. My intent is not to mislead anybody. My intent was to help you get an overview of these things and maybe to understand that it's not a 3-month paid vacation for your employees.
Okay, we'll give them a second. Jim Bishop from Morgan Stanley responded to the previous question with pay from normal funds.
You want to open up the mic for Jim? Jim, if you feel like you want to talk about that, please.
Okay, give me a second. I gotta find Jim.
Jim can also unmute himself, I believe.
Oh, I'm having all sorts of technical difficulties. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, so that storm did something to my Wi-Fi. And anyway, so I'm on my phone, which I'm not used to. But anyway, my understanding of that, and I've listened to a lot of different work, related to privately held businesses and all. It just doesn't seem to matter on that question. It is not about direct pay. The source of funds just doesn't seem consequential in answering that question. So
Okay.
just don't think it matters, and there is no reason. You definitely want to keep an accounting of the purpose of funds or the category of what you're paying out, as we talked about for tax reasons and other things at year end. But the actual source of funds doesn't seem to matter. And I don't mean to grandstand, but I will say, and if you lack an advisor on your retirement plan, I would be happy to talk to your employees about some of those questions undertaking distributions.
All right.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay, well, Sharon, I think, okay, Michelle agreed that the source doesn't matter, but tracking is very important. Okay, good. Okay, another question. Is EIDL 10K cash advance only available if one applies for the SBA loan?
Again, I'm going to turn that over to somebody with a great deal of experience and wisdom over me. I am not expert on these loans.
Okay.
Jim, I don't know if you can weigh in. Kaiser people, I don't know if you can weigh in.
I would be reluctant to answer that too quickly myself.
Okay.
What about the key bank person that signed up for today? Are you on?
Not on right now, no.
Okay.
Okay. Well,
Talk to your bank.
Good advice. Thank you, Sharon. It's always interesting listening to you, and I look forward to a future session when we're all back together.
Yeah,
Amy, can I add
hopefully
one
our
more?
next one. Oh,
Wait.
Go ahead.
You know, I do want to say this, and this came up from a roundtable for the Ohio Restaurant Association. There is every reason you should believe that with the PPP that you will, at the end of the day, when you go to get this your loan forgiven, most math by many accountants says you really won't end up getting the entirety of it waived, but do not. So from an expectation standpoint, don't be shocked that only 80% gets waived. However, that would be no reason not to take the loan. It's too good. So you do want to take the loan.
Yeah.
I mean, that just don't worry about the fact that down the road you find out, oh, some of this wasn't forgiven. It's not expensive. You need the money to get by day to day. Take the money.
Right. It's a 1% interest rate. And again, think of this as if you're on an airplane. Put your own oxygen mask on first, yours being the business, and then put the people around you, i.e. your employees, masks on them. If the business does not last, the employees don't have a job to come back to. So you are navigating a couple of things here to keep things going after we get over the curve. And again, your business advisors, your bankers, your accountants, your CPAs, your attorneys, they are your friends right now. Reach out to them.
All right. Thank you. I think we'll end it now. Thank you, Sharon. Great information. Thanks,
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. And hopefully we'll get to medical marijuana in our discussion someday. Bye, all.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day. Bye.